I never thought a glossy piece of 5x7 cardstock would be the reason I financially ruined my own mother and brother. But here we are. The funny thing about family trauma is that it rarely starts with an explosion. It usually begins with a phone call on a random Tuesday afternoon, sliding into your life like a familiar poison you have been conditioned to swallow. My phone vibrated on my desk, the caller ID flashing a name that always made my stomach tie itself into a complicated knot. Beatrice. My mother. I stared at the screen for a solid 10 seconds, listening to the hum of the warehouse outside my office door, before I finally tapped the green button and pressed the receiver to my ear. Declan, it is your mother, she announced, using that shrill, impatient tone that implied I was already wasting her precious time just by existing. There was no greeting, no asking how I was doing, and certainly no asking about her only grandson. Callahan is putting together a family holiday photo shoot. He is handling everything for the company right now, and he is under a tremendous amount of pressure. We are doing it at the high-end studio downtown this Saturday. I need you to send me $2,000 to cover your portion of the sitting fee and the prints. $2,000. She said it casually, as if she were asking me to pick up a gallon of milk from the grocery store. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out the glass window of my office. From where I sat, I could see my employees operating forklifts, moving massive pallets of goods across a 90,000 square foot logistics facility. $2,000 is a bit steep for a few family photos, do you not think? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Beatrice huffed loudly into the microphone. It is not just a few photos, Declan. It is a legacy portrait. Callahan needs professional images for his corporate profile and the family business newsletter. You know how hard he works to keep this family afloat. The least you can do is contribute. And please, Declan, I am begging you, do not wear one of your warehouse t-shirts to the studio. Buy a decent button-down. Make sure Ronan is quiet and stays out of the way. We want this to look perfect, and I do not want you embarrassing your brother in front of the photographer. She was talking about my 6-year-old son like he was a stray dog that might track mud onto her pristine white rug. If you have ever been treated like a second-class citizen in your own family, you know the exact heat that rises in your chest at words like that. It is a burning, suffocating feeling. My name is Declan, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible child, the ghost haunting the edges of my own family tree. I am 34 years old, raising my incredible son Ronan all by myself. To my mother and my older brother, Callahan, I am nothing more than a failure. They think I am just a guy who loads cardboard boxes onto wooden pallets for a living. They think I am barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, a perpetual disappointment standing in the blinding shadow of the golden child. Callahan, at 36, runs a retail furniture business that he inherited the management of. He plays the role of a hotshot corporate executive to absolute perfection. He wears custom-tailored Italian suits, drives a luxury sports utility vehicle that costs more than most people make in 5 years, and talks loudly at every family dinner about his expanding profit margins and his genius business acumen. Beatrice worships the ground he walks on. To her, Callahan is the sun, and the rest of the world is just lucky to orbit him. But the truth is a funny thing. I do not load boxes. I own the warehouse. I own the entire logistics and supply chain consulting firm. My company generated $8.5 million in gross revenue last year alone. We manage distribution networks for major national retailers. But I wear plain gray sweaters, drive a reliable, unassuming sedan, and I keep my mouth firmly shut about my bank accounts. Why? Because the moment my family smells money, they turn into absolute vultures. And honestly, it has always been easier to let them think I was a nobody. Kept the peace. Kept their greedy hands out of my life. I sat there listening to Beatrice breathe heavily into the phone, waiting for my compliance. I looked down at my left wrist. Hidden neatly under the frayed cuff of my cheap cotton sweater was a Rolex timepiece that cost more than Callahan's entire office furniture setup. I slowly rolled my sleeve down, hiding the watch from the world, and let out a long, heavy sigh. "Sure, Mom," I said, my voice deliberately flat and defeated. "I will transfer the $2,000 today." Ronan and I will be there on Saturday. I will make sure we are dressed appropriately. See that you do, she snapped, before hanging up without a goodbye. I agreed to pay. I agreed to show up and play the familiar, exhausting role of the quiet, unimportant younger brother. I thought I was just paying a temporary tax for family peace. But I had absolutely no idea that the $2,000 I was wiring to her account was going to fund the literal erasure of my own son's existence. Has your family ever treated you like a second-class citizen in your own home? Have they ever looked right through you as if you did not matter? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next still makes my blood boil to this day. To fully understand why this upcoming photo shoot became the final nail in the coffin, you have to understand the museum of pain I have been walking through for my entire life. The disrespect from Beatrice and Callahan was not a sudden, one-time event. It was a daily, scheduled programming that I had endured for decades. I had spent years collecting artifacts of their toxic behavior, locking them away in my mind, constantly telling myself that this was just how families were supposed to operate. Let us take a walk through this museum. Exhibit A happened the day I graduated from college with highest honors. I was the very first person in the history of our family to actually finish a 4-year degree, let alone graduate at the top of my class. I remember standing on the sprawling campus lawn on a bright, sunny afternoon, sweating in my black cap and gown. I was clutching my diploma, watching all the other students hugging their proud parents, taking hundreds of photos. I waited for 2 hours. I called Beatrice 5 times. She finally answered on the 6th ring. I was holding back tears, my voice shaking as I asked where she was. She sounded incredibly annoyed, as if I had interrupted something vitally important. Callahan's new puppy ate something weird, Declan. She huffed over the line. I had to go with him to the emergency veterinary clinic to hold his hand. He was so worried. It is just a graduation, for heaven's sake. We will celebrate your little piece of paper later. We never celebrated. There was no dinner, no card, no congratulations. Exhibit B was Ronan's 5th birthday party. I had invited the whole family, hoping against hope that they could put their arrogance aside for one afternoon to celebrate a little boy who just wanted his grandmother and uncle to love him. I rented out a local pizza parlor and bought a massive superhero cake. Beatrice showed up an hour late, entirely empty-handed, claiming she had left the wrapped gift on her kitchen counter because she was rushing. Callahan swaggered into the pizza parlor even later, wearing a suit jacket and acting like he was doing us a massive favor by gracing us with his presence. He walked up to my sweet, excited little boy and handed him a plastic toy car. No bag, no wrapping paper. I immediately recognized it. It was a cheap promotional toy from a fast food chain. It was missing its back left wheel and had a massive crack down the windshield. He had literally pulled a piece of garbage out of his car's cup holder on the drive over just to have something to hand the kid. Ronan, bless his pure and innocent heart, smiled his bright smile and said, "Thank you, Uncle Callahan." I excused myself, walked into the men's restroom, gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, and stared at my own reflection until my knuckles turned completely white. Exhibit C was the continuous, suffocating financial gaslighting. Every single Thanksgiving, Callahan would hold court at the head of the dinner table, swirling a glass of expensive red wine like a cartoon villain. "We are projecting $500,000 in sales this quarter," he would brag loudly, making sure everyone in the room was listening. Then, he would look down the table at me with a sickening, pitying smirk. "How are things at the warehouse, Declan? Still moving those heavy boxes around? Let me know if you need a small personal loan to get you and the boy through the holidays. I know things must be tight on an hourly wage." I always just nodded, taking a quiet sip of my ice water. I knew the truth. Through my extensive network in the commercial real estate and corporate banking sectors, I knew exactly what Callahan's financial sheets looked like. His business was actively bleeding cash. He was over $1.2 million in debt to a regional bank. He was drowning, faking a lavish, high-roller lifestyle on maxed-out corporate credit lines and high-interest loans, while my logistics company was quietly signing multi-million-dollar fulfillment contracts. I let him brag. I let him think he was the absolute king of the world, sitting on a throne of lies. I was completely used to being stepped on. I had developed a thick skin. I could handle their delusions, their arrogance, and their blatant favoritism. I had built a massive fortress of success in complete secret, shielding myself from their toxicity while securing a future for my son. But when they shifted their crosshairs away from me and aimed their cruelty directly at Ronan, that was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment I stopped being the quiet, compliant younger brother. That was the moment I started actively digging their graves. What would you do if someone in your family handed your child a piece of literal garbage as a birthday gift? Would you keep the piece, or would you burn the bridge? The morning of the photo shoot arrived with a bitter, biting chill in the late November air. I had spent the morning getting Ronan ready. I dressed him in a neat, dark blue knit sweater, crisp pressed trousers, and his favorite little brown dress shoes. He looked incredibly handsome, his little face glowing with pure excitement. Despite everything, he loved his grandmother, and he thought taking professional pictures with the whole family at a fancy studio was a grand, exciting adventure. We drove downtown and pulled up to a high-end, modern photography studio. The moment we walked through the glass doors, the atmosphere was already suffocatingly tense. Callahan was standing directly in the center of the brightly lit room, loudly barking orders at the photographer's young assistant about lighting angles. Next to him, pulling aggressively on a thick leather leash, was a massive, unruly purebred dog. I later found out through the family grapevine that he had spent exactly $4,000 on the animal just a week prior, specifically to use it as a prop for his successful, rugged family man aesthetic. The dog was currently drooling on the studio's hardwood floor. Beatrice was hovering around Callahan like a frantic moth drawn to a flame. She was adjusting his expensive silk tie, smoothing down the lapels of his suit, and dabbing at his forehead with a tissue. "Focus all the main lighting on Callahan, please," she loudly instructed the lead photographer, not even bothering to lower her voice or pretend she cared about anyone else in the room. "He is the star of this family, and these photos need to reflect his status." She barely even glanced in my direction when I walked in holding Ronan's hand. "Okay, everyone, let us gather around the set," the photographer called out, looking visibly stressed. They had constructed an elegant, cozy living room scene complete with a faux brick fireplace, a massive, beautifully decorated holiday tree, and a long wooden bench. Ronan ran forward, pointing excitedly at Callahan's new pet. "Can I pet him, Grandma? He is so fluffy," he asked, his voice filled with innocent wonder. Beatrice immediately stepped forward and swatted her hand at the air, physically shooing my son away. "No, Ronan, absolutely not. Do not touch the dog. You will get dog hair all over your clothes and you will ruin the aesthetic of the picture. Just go sit on the very edge of the bench over there and stay quiet." My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. I walked over, put a firm, protective hand on Ronan's small shoulder, and guided him to the front row of the setup. We sat down together on the bench. Then Callahan decided to make his move. He brought his massive, restless dog over and deliberately pushed his way right into the center of the frame. As he did, he physically bumped his hip against me, forcing the bench to slide backward and to the left. He nudged me and Ronan so far out to the edge of the physical frame that we were practically sitting in the dark shadows of a large lighting umbrella, completely disconnected from the central group. Aunt Niev, my mother's older sister and the only person in this entire bloodline with a functioning moral compass, saw what was happening and frowned deeply. "Beatrice, this is ridiculous. Make some room. Let little Ronan sit in the middle. He is the youngest grandchild. He is practically in the dark over there," she called out, gesturing toward us. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, not even looking our way. "It is perfectly fine, Niev. The framing looks much better this way. We need the large dog in the center to balance out Callahan's suit and give it that wealthy catalog feel. Just smile." I did not cause a scene. I did not yell. I just looked down at Ronan. He was sitting perfectly still, with his small hands politely folded in his lap. Despite being pushed into the shadows, he was smiling a bright, genuine, beautiful smile straight at the camera lens, trying so incredibly hard to be a good boy for a grandmother who did not even want to look at him. The blinding flashes went off repeatedly. The session dragged on for an agonizing hour, and then it finally ended. As we were walking across the freezing asphalt of the parking lot back to our car, Ronan slipped his little, cold hand into mine. He looked up at me with those big, hopeful brown eyes and whispered softly, "Did I smile good, Daddy? Was I sitting still enough?" I stopped walking. I knelt down right there on the frozen concrete, zipped his winter coat up to his chin to block the wind, and kissed him deeply on the forehead. "You smiled perfectly, buddy. You are the absolute best kid in the whole world, and I am so proud of you." I drove home that day thinking that was the end of it. I thought it was just going to be another mildly humiliating family event that I would have to sweep under the rug to keep the peace. But when the printed holiday cards finally arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, my son's beautiful smile had been erased permanently. What do you think they did with those photos? Keep watching, because the level of cruelty is about to go off the charts. It was a normal, quiet Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks before Christmas. The sky was gray and threatening snow. I had just picked Ronan up from his elementary school, and we were walking up the driveway of our house. I stopped at the metal mailbox at the end of the curb and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Nestled between a utility bill and a grocery flyer was a thick, heavy, expensive-looking red envelope with shiny gold foil lettering on the front. Beatrice's return address was elegantly stamped in the top left corner. "Look at this, buddy. It is the fancy family pictures Grandma took," I said, holding the heavy red envelope up in the air. Ronan's eyes immediately lit up with pure joy. He dropped his heavy school backpack right onto the porch and started hopping up and down on his toes. "Can I open it? Please, Daddy, please. I want to see my smile. I want to see the doggy too." "Go for it," I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. I handed him the envelope as I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. We walked into the warm kitchen, and Ronan carefully used his little fingers to tear the gold-lined flap open. He reached inside and slowly pulled out the glossy, premium 5x7 cardstock. I turned my back for just a moment to take off my winter coat, hanging it carefully on the rack by the door. I was fully expecting to hear him giggle, or point out Aunt Neve's funny hat, or make a comment about how big the dog looked. Instead, there was silence. A heavy, thick, incredibly confusing silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the kitchen. I turned around. Ronan was standing completely frozen by the kitchen island, staring down at the card in his hands. His little brow was furrowed in deep, heartbreaking confusion. He flipped the thick card over, looking at the completely blank white back, and then slowly flipped it to the glossy front again, as if hoping the image would magically change. "Daddy?" His voice was incredibly small, trembling slightly at the edges. "Where am I?" I walked over to the island, a cold, heavy knot of dread instantly forming in the pit of my stomach. I stood behind him and looked over his shoulder at the photograph. The picture was stunningly clear, printed on top-tier, expensive photographic paper. The lighting was absolutely perfect, bright and warm. Right in the center of the image stood Callahan, looking unbearably smug in his tailored suit, flanked closely by Beatrice and a few other smiling relatives. I immediately dragged my eyes to the far left side of the photo, checking the shadowy spot on the wooden bench where Ronan and I had been sitting. I was there, but barely. My physical body had been cropped so severely by the editor that only my right shoulder and half of my gray sweater-clad arm were visible in the frame. I looked like a stranger accidentally walking into the background of someone else's family portrait. And Ronan? Ronan was entirely, completely gone. He was not just pushed to the side. He was not just accidentally cropped out due to a weird framing aspect ratio. He had been intentionally digitally removed, erased entirely from existence by Photoshop. Where my 6-year-old son had been sitting in his dark blue sweater, folding his hands and smiling his heart out, there was now a digitally cloned, artificially generated patch of the faux brick fireplace. The editor had literally painted over my child to make it look like the bench was completely empty on that side. My breath caught sharply in my throat, choking me. I stared at the altered image, trying desperately to process the sheer audacity, the deliberate, venomous cruelty of it. And then, my eyes shifted to the center of the photograph, and I noticed the final, sickening detail. Right in the dead center of the photo, placed prominently and proudly right in front of Callahan's legs, was that $4,000 purebred dog. They had explicitly instructed the photographer to digitally edit out my child, the only flesh-and-blood grandchild in the entire family, simply to make the visual composition look cleaner and more symmetrical for Callahan and his expensive pet. They had replaced my son with a dog. I stood paralyzed, staring at the glossy paper. The blood rushing through my veins felt like it had instantly turned into freezing ice water. And then, breaking through the ringing in my ears, I heard the absolute worst sound in the entire world. The sound of a 6-year-old's heart breaking into a million jagged pieces. Would you have completely lost your mind right then and there? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. A single tear, thick and heavy like a raindrop, fell from Ronan's eye and splashed directly onto the glossy surface of the card, landing right on the digitally cloned bricks that had replaced him. His bottom lip began to quiver uncontrollably. He did not throw a loud tantrum. He did not scream or throw the card across the room. He just slowly looked up at me, his big brown eyes completely swimming in tears, his little face crumpled in genuine, profound anguish. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice cracking painfully in the quiet kitchen. "Why didn't Grandma want me in the picture? Did I do something wrong? Was I not sitting still enough like she asked? Am I bad?" Hearing those words come out of my son's mouth was like taking a physical bullet to the chest. Every single primitive, protective instinct in my entire body flared up all at once, raging like an uncontrollable wildfire. The urge to grab my car keys, drive straight over to Beatrice's house, kick her heavy oak front door completely off its hinges, and tear her pristine living room apart piece by piece was overwhelmingly powerful. I wanted to scream until my lungs physically gave out and my throat bled. I wanted to grab Callahan by his expensive custom lapels and drag him out into the freezing street to show him what real pressure felt like. If you are a parent watching this, you know precisely what I felt in that exact moment. You know that blinding, red-hot rage. Hit the like button right now if you would defend your child at absolutely all costs against anyone, even your own blood. But I looked down at my quietly sobbing son. If I exploded right now, if I lost control and started smashing things or screaming into the phone, it would only scare him more. It would reinforce his fear that something was terribly wrong. He did not need an angry monster right now. He needed his father to be an unbreakable rock, a safe harbor in a sudden storm. I dropped to my knees on the cold tile of the kitchen floor, placing myself right at his eye level. I gently took the cursed photograph from his trembling hands, tossed it face down onto the granite counter so he would not have to look at it anymore, and pulled him into a fiercely tight embrace. I held him firmly against my chest as he sobbed into my shoulder, his small, fragile hands clutching the fabric on the back of my shirt like I was the only thing keeping him from falling off the earth. "Listen to me, Ronan. Listen to my voice," I said, forcing my tone to remain completely steady and calm, even though my heart was hammering violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. Do you hear me? You are perfect. You are the brightest, most wonderful light in my entire life. Grandma and Uncle Callahan. Their hearts and their eyes are broken. They cannot see how incredibly wonderful you are. And that is their terrible loss, buddy. Not yours. Never yours." We sat together on that kitchen floor for a very long time. I just let him cry, letting all the sadness out, while I smoothed his hair and hummed a quiet, familiar tune to slowly calm his breathing down. Eventually, when the tears stopped, I stood up, made him his absolute favorite snack of apple slices and peanut butter, and set him up comfortably in the living room with his favorite animated movie. I promised him that this weekend, just the two of us were going to go to an even better studio and take our own special photos. Once he was distracted, safe and comfortable on the couch, I walked slowly back into the kitchen. I picked up the discarded holiday card from the counter. The silence in my house was absolutely deafening. I did not shed a single tear. I did not yell a single word. The hot, blinding rage I had felt 10 minutes ago had fundamentally changed. It had crystallized. It had crossed the chaotic boundary of impulsive, messy emotion and transformed into a cold, sharp, ruthlessly calculated mathematical equation. They wanted to pretend that my son and I did not exist. They wanted to erase my child from their perfect, wealthy little narrative. Fine. I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket. I did not call my mother to curse her out. I did not send an angry text message to my brother demanding a fake apology. I dialed a completely different number. I called my corporate attorney, Thaddeus. What kind of plan do you think I was about to set in motion to destroy them? Thaddeus, I said, my voice remarkably calm when he answered the phone on the second ring. I need you to open up your secure files. Pull up the documents on the commercial property located on 4th Street. The large retail building our holding company acquired back in October. I have the digital files right here on my screen. Declan? Thaddeus replied, his tone immediately shifting from casual greeting into sharp professional mode. DR Holdings owns the building outright. Free and clear. The primary commercial tenant is a high-end furniture retailer. According to the ledger, they are currently 4 months behind on their lease payments. You explicitly instructed me last month to hold off on sending the standard eviction notices because you mentioned the tenant was a family member. Not anymore, I said softly. My eyes locked on the heavily photoshopped holiday picture lying on my counter. Draft the commercial eviction notice right now. I want the language to be absolutely ironclad. 0 loopholes. But that is not all, Thaddeus. DR Holdings also bought out a massive portfolio of distressed commercial loans from the regional bank a few months ago. Check the financial records. Is Callahan's business loan included in that specific bundle we purchased? I listened to the rapid, rhythmic clicking of a mechanical keyboard on the other end of the line as Thaddeus ran the search query. A few tense moments later, Thaddeus let out a low, surprised whistle. Yes, Declan. It absolutely is. $1.2 million in total default. They have missed 6 consecutive payments. Technically speaking, through the corporate structure of your holding company, you personally own his entire debt. You are his primary, undisputed creditor. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The massive, invisible web was already spun perfectly. They just did not know they were completely trapped in the center of it yet. I had initially bought that commercial property and those distressed loans as a silent, invisible safety net. It was my way to secretly keep an eye on my older brother's failing retail empire, perhaps intending to silently bail him out one day when he finally hit absolute rock bottom. I had tried to be a good brother. I was an absolute fool. But Thaddeus was not done delivering information. He dropped another piece of financial intel that made the entire kitchen spin around me. Declan, there is something else you really need to know before we proceed. When we officially took over this loan portfolio from the bank, we also inherited all the attached collateral files. Callahan's massive business loan was not just unsecured. It was backed by a secondary guarantor. Who? I asked, though I already felt the sickening answer forming in the pit of my gut. Beatrice, Thaddeus said clearly. Your mother. According to these signed documents, she secretly took out a second mortgage on her primary residential home. $300,000 in equity extracted. She leveraged her own house to inject emergency cash into Callahan's failing company last year. Because that specific mortgage was collateralized against the commercial loan, that debt is also legally tied to your portfolio now. You hold the paper on her house. A chilling, profound realization washed over me, freezing me in place. My mother had literally bet the roof over her own head on her golden child, keeping it a total secret from everyone in the family to protect his pride. And now, by a stroke of pure, devastating cosmic irony, I legally held the deed to her financial ruin. Draw up the foreclosure papers for the residential property. I commanded, my voice completely devoid of any warmth, mercy, or hesitation. I want the total asset freeze authorized. I want the legal eviction notice for the commercial retail space finalized. And I want the formal demand for immediate repayment in full on the $1.2 million business loan. No payment plans. No extensions. Package all the legal documents together into one file. Declan. Thaddeus paused, his voice cautious. If we execute this aggressively all at once, they will literally lose everything. The business will be seized, the company cars will be repossessed, and the house will be foreclosed on. It will take immediate, catastrophic effect. I know exactly what it will do, I replied smoothly. Have the legal documents printed on heavy, high-quality cardstock. Have them securely delivered to my house by the 23rd of December. I need to make sure I have enough time to wrap them up beautifully. I hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. I looked at the kitchen garbage can, picked up the glossy holiday card with my erased son, and dropped it into the trash where it belonged. They had cruelly cropped my 6-year-old son out of the family picture to make themselves look better. So, I decided I was going to systematically crop them out of the business world, out of their comfortable home, and out of their blind arrogance. Christmas morning was going to be an absolutely unforgettable event for the golden child and his enabling mother. The weeks leading up to Christmas moved at a glacial pace. I spent my days running my logistics empire, finalizing the end-of-the-year contracts, and quietly coordinating with my legal team to ensure that every single document was utterly flawless. There could be zero room for error, no technicalities they could use to escape the trap. I spent my evenings with Ronan, watching holiday movies, building massive forts out of couch cushions, and doing everything in my power to erase the profound sadness that had shadowed his eyes since the day that cursed holiday card arrived in our mailbox. Christmas morning finally dawned, bitter cold and heavily overcast. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, threatening a massive snowstorm later in the afternoon. I woke up early, made Ronan a massive plate of chocolate chip pancakes, and helped him get dressed. I put on a simple, unassuming dark gray sweater and a pair of dark jeans. I wanted to look exactly how they expected me to look, unremarkable, average, and easily dismissed. I went out to my sedan, opened the trunk, and carefully placed a rectangular box wrapped in expensive, deep red velvet paper inside. It looked like a box of premium cigars or perhaps a rare bottle of scotch. It was heavy, dense with the weight of legal ruin. We drove across town to Beatrice's house. She lived in a sprawling, 2-story colonial home in a highly desirable neighborhood. It was a house she could no longer afford, a house she had secretly leveraged to the absolute limit just to maintain the illusion of generational wealth. As we pulled into the wide driveway, I noticed Callahan's massive, aggressively styled luxury sports utility vehicle parked dead center, taking up 2 spaces. I parked my modest car near the street, grabbed the velvet box, and held Ronan's hand as we walked up the brick pathway. The moment I pushed the heavy oak front door open, the suffocating smell of artificial pine, expensive perfume, and roasting meat hit me like a physical wall. The house was loud, packed with various relatives, most of whom I had not seen since the previous holiday season. These were the flying monkeys of our family dynamic, aunts, uncles, and cousins who blindly orbited Beatrice and Callahan, eagerly absorbing the toxic narrative that Callahan was a visionary genius and I was a helpless loser. We walked into the main living room. The fireplace was roaring, and a massive, 12-foot tree stood in the corner, drowning in glass ornaments. Callahan was standing by the fireplace, holding a crystal glass of champagne. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive cashmere turtleneck and holding court, laughing loudly at his own jokes. Beatrice was fluttering around him, offering him hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," a voice sneered from the leather sofa. It was my cousin Lucian, a guy who had been trying and failing to get a job at Callahan's company for 3 years. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my plain sweater. "Did you get lost on the way from the warehouse, Declan? Or did you just have to wait for the bus?" A few of the relatives chuckled. I felt Ronan squeeze my hand tightly. I looked down at him, offered a warm, reassuring smile, and gently guided him toward the kitchen to get a glass of orange juice. I did not engage with Lucian. I simply ignored him entirely, which only seemed to irritate him more. I walked back into the living room and placed my velvet-wrapped box right in the center of the massive pile of gifts under the tree. It sat there, glowing ominously under the string lights, a ticking time bomb wrapped in a red bow. Callahan tapped his champagne glass with a silver spoon, demanding everyone's attention. The room quieted down. He puffed out his chest, looking around the room with an expression of supreme arrogance. "I just want to make a quick toast," Callahan announced, his voice booming. "To family, to success. This has been a record-breaking year for the business. We are expanding our retail footprint. We are crushing our quarterly targets. And I am looking forward to an even more prosperous new year. It takes relentless hard work and a visionary mindset to build an empire. But looking around this room, I know I have the right people backing me." He paused, taking a slow sip of his champagne, and then his eyes casually drifted over to me. He offered a fake, condescending smile. "Oh, and Declan, sorry again about the holiday photo, man. The photographer said the framing was just getting way too cramped on that side of the bench, so he had to crop it down to make it look professional. You understand how these high-end visual things work, right?" He did not even mention Ronan. He did not even apologize for erasing my child. He just casually brushed it off as a minor technical necessity to make room for his dog. I stood there, holding a glass of sparkling water. My pulse was steady. My mind was crystal clear. I looked at him, offering a small, incredibly polite smile. "Do not worry about it, Callahan," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I totally understand. Sometimes you just have to cut out the things that do not fit your picture. Actually, I brought a very special gift for you and Mom today to make up for how cramped things have been." Callahan raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the idea that I could afford anything of value. "Is that right? Well, let us see what the warehouse manager brought." I gestured toward the tree. "It is the red velvet box. Why don't you go ahead and open it now? I think it is the perfect time." The entire room watched as Callahan confidently strode over to the tree, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The bomb was primed. The timer had reached 0. Callahan reached down and picked up the heavy velvet box. He weighed it in his hands, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heavy. What did you do, Declan?" "Bring me a box of premium engine parts from your forklifts." A few of the relatives giggled. Beatrice stood nearby, crossing her arms. "Just open it quickly, Callahan. The roast is almost ready to be served," she said, already bored with the interaction. Callahan pulled the red ribbon, letting it fall to the floor. He tore through the velvet paper, revealing a sleek, unmarked black leather folio box. He popped the metal clasp and flipped the lid open. Inside rested a thick stack of legal documents, printed on heavy stock paper, bound together with a black legal clip. The top page featured a massive, red, embossed stamp from the county clerk's office. Callahan's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound confusion. He pulled the thick stack of papers out of the box. "What is this?" he muttered, flipping past the cover page. "Legal filings? Declan, what kind of joke is this?" "It is not a joke," I said quietly, taking a step forward so I was standing directly in the center of the room. The casual chatter among the relatives died down instantly. The atmosphere shifted from festive to freezing in a matter of seconds. Callahan's eyes darted rapidly across the dense paragraphs of legal jargon. I watched the physical transformation happen in real time. The color literally drained from his face, starting at his neck and moving upward until his skin was a pasty, sickly gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that the thick paper rattled audibly in the quiet room. "Notice of commercial eviction," Callahan read aloud, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "Asset freeze authorization. Immediate demand for repayment." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. "Declan, what the hell is this?" "This says my retail space is being seized by the property management group. And my business loan. This says my entire $1.2 million debt has been called in due to default by a company called DR Holdings." "That is correct," I said, my voice steady and cold. Beatrice stepped forward, her brow furrowed in anger. "Callahan, what is he talking about? What is DR Holdings?" "Declan, stop playing these stupid games and explain yourself right now." I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked directly on my brother. "DR Holdings," I explained slowly, articulating every single syllable so everyone in the room could hear the executioner's blade falling. It stands for Declan and Ronan. I own the holding company Callahan, which means I own the 90,000 square foot logistics firm that generated $8 million last year. Which also means I am the sole owner of the commercial property you have been squatting in without paying rent for the last 4 months. I am your landlord. A collective gasp echoed through the living room. Lucian dropped his drink, the glass shattering on the floor, but nobody even looked at him. Callahan staggered backward, his knees practically buckling. He reached out and grabbed the edge of the stone fireplace just to keep himself from collapsing onto the rug. You own the building? He stammered, saliva pooling at the corner of his mouth. No, that is impossible. You work in a warehouse. I own the warehouse, I corrected him, my tone devoid of any empathy. And more importantly, a few months ago, my corporate acquisitions team bought a large portfolio of distressed debt from the regional bank. I bought your business loan, Callahan. I bought your failure. You owe $1.2 million. And as your primary creditor, I am officially calling the debt in. Today. Right now. You are bankrupt. You are evicted. Your company is dead. You cannot do this. Callahan screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. He threw the papers onto the floor. You are my brother. You cannot just destroy my business. I need time. I can get the money. I just need a 6-month extension. You had time, I replied, feeling an icy calm settle over my entire body. You had years to be a decent human being. But instead, you chose to treat me like dirt. I tolerated that. But then, you chose to digitally erase my 6-year-old son from this family because you preferred the aesthetic of your dog. You decided my son did not fit into your picture. So, I decided you no longer fit into the business world. I looked down at the legal documents scattered across the floor. Those papers are active. The locks on your retail store were changed at 6 o'clock this morning by my security team. Your corporate bank accounts have been frozen by the court order. It is over. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed, decade-long illusion shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The golden child was stripped of his armor, exposed as a massive, fraudulent failure in front of the entire family. But I was not finished. I turned slowly on my heel and looked directly at Beatrice, who was standing frozen by the sofa, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. Do not look so surprised, Mom, I said smoothly, because the second part of that gift is entirely for you. Beatrice blinked rapidly, her hands clutching the pearl necklace around her throat. For me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Declan, what have you done? You are ruining Christmas. You are ruining your brother's life. He ruined his own life. I shot back, my voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the room like a whip. I am just handing him the bill. But let us talk about your bill, Mother. Right on cue, the heavy oak front door opened. I had left it unlocked. Walking into the foyer, brushing the light snow off his expensive wool overcoat, was my corporate attorney, Thaddeus. He was accompanied by a large, incredibly stern-looking man wearing a dark suit, a licensed process server. The presence of these two outsiders, dressed in severe business attire, instantly shattered the illusion that this was just a messy family argument. They brought the cold, merciless reality of the legal system directly into Beatrice's living room. Thaddeus walked over to me, handing me a second, thinner black folder. Everything has been filed with the county clerk, Declan, he said professionally, not even glancing at the shocked relatives. The secondary documents are ready for service. I took the folder and walked directly up to Beatrice. I held it out to her. She refused to take it, backing away as if the folder were covered in venom. Take it, I commanded. When she did not move, I opened the folder myself and pulled out the single sheet of paper. Since you will not read it, I will explain it to the room, I said loudly. When my company purchased Callahan's toxic, defaulting debt from the bank, we also inherited all the collateral files attached to that loan. Turns out Callahan did not secure that $1.2 million on his own merit. He needed a guarantor. He needed someone to co-sign and leverage their own assets. I looked Beatrice dead in the eyes. Her face was no longer pale. It was flushed with a deep, frantic panic. "You took out a secret second mortgage on this house, didn't you, Mom?" I asked, though it was not a question. $300,000 in equity, stripped out of the home my father worked his whole life to pay off, just so you could secretly fund Callahan's failing vanity project. And because you tied your home to his commercial loan, this house is the collateral. And since the loan is in terminal default, I paused, letting the devastating reality hang in the air for a fraction of a second. I own the debt on this house, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, DR Holdings has officially initiated foreclosure proceedings on this property. Beatrice let out a sound that I had never heard before. It was a guttural, raw shriek of absolute terror. She lunged forward, grabbing my arms, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my sweater. "No, Declan, no. You are insane. You cannot do this. You are going to throw your own mother out onto the street over a stupid photograph." I easily detached her hands from my arms and stepped back, looking at her with a profound, terrifying emptiness. "Do not reduce this to a photograph. This is about a lifetime of you treating me like garbage, and then enabling this pathetic excuse for a man to hand my 6-year-old child a broken piece of trash for his birthday, and then literally erasing my boy from existence because you were ashamed of us. You handed the deed to your home to a bankrupt fraud to fuel his ego. I am not throwing you out on the street. Your own blind, toxic favoritism threw you out on the street." I gestured to the process server. He stepped forward, holding out a yellow copy of the paperwork, and tapped it against Beatrice's shoulder. "You have been served, ma'am," he said in a flat, bored voice before stepping back. Beatrice collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The illusion was dead. The queen was dethroned. The golden child was ruined. If you have watched the story up to this point, you know exactly how satisfying it feels to finally stand up to the bullies in your life. I want you to drop a single letter W in the comments section below. That W stands for win, for all the invisible kids who finally took their power back. I promise I will heart and reply to every single comment that has the W keyword in it, because we are in this together. Let me know you are still with me, because the fallout from this moment was absolutely chaotic. The scene in the living room devolved into absolute, unprecedented chaos. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed stage play suddenly catch fire, forcing all the actors to drop their scripts and panic. Callahan was still leaning heavily against the stone fireplace, hyperventilating. He looked like a deflated balloon. His custom suit suddenly looked ridiculous on him, like a child wearing his father's clothes. He kept dragging his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it, muttering, "My store, the inventory, the cars," over and over again. Then the flying monkeys turned. The very relatives who, just 20 minutes prior, had been eagerly laughing at my expense and praising Callahan's fake genius, suddenly realized that the golden goose was actually a massive vulture. Lucian, my cousin who had dropped his glass, marched furiously across the room. He grabbed Callahan roughly by the shoulder, spinning him around. "You lied to us," Lucian screamed, his face turning bright red. "You stood in my kitchen last month and told me your company was expanding. I gave you $50,000 of my savings to invest in your new showroom. You told me it was a guaranteed return. Where is my money, Callahan?" Callahan could not even look him in the eye. He just shook his head weakly. "It is gone, Luke. It went straight to the suppliers. The bank. You stole from the family," another uncle shouted from the back of the room. The atmosphere turned, incredibly hostile. The sycophants were realizing that they had backed the wrong horse, and they were ready to tear him apart to save themselves. They surrounded Callahan, shouting, demanding answers, demanding their money back. Beatrice was still wailing on the couch, crying out for someone to help her, but no one was paying attention to her anymore. Through the chaos, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. I turned and saw Aunt Niev. She had quietly walked over to the kitchen entrance, standing protectively in front of Ronan. her hands covering his ears so he would not have to hear the vicious screaming of the adults. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears, but her expression was fierce and resolute. "You did what you had to do, Declan," Niev said softly, nodding her head. "Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." She then walked slowly over to the sofa and stood over her weeping sister. Beatrice looked up, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face, reaching her hands out. "Niev, please talk to him. Tell him to stop. He is destroying us." Niev crossed her arms, looking down at Beatrice with profound disappointment. "No, Beatrice, you destroyed yourselves. You have treated this boy like a burden since the day he was born, and you worshipped a liar. You literally erased your own beautiful grandson from this family because of your twisted pride. You reap exactly what you sow. I suggest you start packing your expensive china." I walked over to the kitchen, knelt down, and picked Ronan up in my arms. He buried his face in my neck. He was not crying, but he was overwhelmed by the noise. "We are leaving now, buddy," I whispered to him. "We are going to go get some hot chocolate, just you and me." I turned and started walking toward the front door. Thaddeus and the process server had already stepped outside, waiting by their car. As I reached for the brass doorknob, I heard frantic footsteps behind me. Callahan rushed into the foyer, practically tripping over his own feet. He threw himself in front of the door, blocking my exit. He was crying, actual tears streaming down his face. A pathetic, broken mess of a man. "Declan, please," he begged, clasping his hands together in front of his chest like he was praying to a deity. "Please, I am begging you. You cannot take the business. It is everything I have. Give me 1 month. Just give me 30 days to find a new investor to sell some inventory. I will pay you back. I swear to God, I will pay you back every cent. You cannot do this to your own family." I stopped. I held my son tightly in my left arm, feeling his small heartbeat against my chest. I looked at the man who had tormented me for 34 years, the man who had handed my son trash and then deleted him from existence. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I just felt incredibly, wonderfully free. I looked deep into Callahan's bloodshot, desperate eyes. He was searching my face for any sign of mercy, any shred of the compliant, quiet little brother he was so used to pushing around. He found nothing but cold, hard reality. "Family?" I repeated the word slowly, tasting it on my tongue. When I looked at that heavily edited holiday photograph, "Callahan, I only saw you and your expensive dog. Where was the family in that picture? You erased us. So as far as I am concerned, I do not have a brother. I just have a heavily indebted commercial tenant who is refusing to vacate my property." Callahan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just let out a pathetic, suffocated sob. "Next Monday," I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged foyer, "I want your entire office cleared out. I want you to take your custom suits, your fake awards, and your dog, and I want you off my property. If there is a single paperclip left in that warehouse on Tuesday morning, I will have my crew throw it into the industrial dumpster. Do not ever contact me again." I stepped forward, forcing him to move out of the way or be physically pushed. He stumbled backward, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor of the foyer, defeated. I opened the door, stepped out into the freezing winter air, and did not look back once. The aftermath of that Christmas morning was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. I did not yield a single inch. I instructed Thaddeus to execute every single document to the maximum extent of the law. Within 1 month, the reality of their situation crushed them completely. Callahan's retail business was officially dissolved. The corporate bank accounts were seized to pay off the remaining fractions of the massive debt. Because he had personally guaranteed certain vendor lines of credit, he was forced to file for Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. The bank repossessed his luxury sports utility vehicle right out of Beatrice's driveway. He was left with nothing but his clothes and his dog. Beatrice's fate was equally severe. Faced with the reality of a foreclosure auction that would publicly humiliate her in front of all her wealthy friends, She chose to rapidly sell the sprawling colonial home for cash. Once the primary mortgage and my secondary lien were fully paid off, she was left with practically nothing. She had to pack up her designer clothes, her expensive furniture, and her shattered pride, and move into a tiny two-bedroom apartment on the less desirable side of town. Callahan, having nowhere else to go, was forced to move in with her. The golden child and his enabler, trapped together in a cramped space, completely stripped of the wealth and status they had used to abuse others. The flying monkeys scattered. The relatives who had lost money investing in Callahan's fraudulent schemes threatened lawsuits, cutting Beatrice and Callahan off entirely. They became social pariahs in our extended family. The toxic empire had not just fallen. It had been pulverized into dust. As for me, I experienced a profound sense of peace that I had never known before. The heavy, suffocating weight of seeking their approval, of trying to prove my worth to people who were determined to misunderstand me, was gone forever. I focused entirely on my company, which continued to thrive, and more importantly, I focused entirely on being the best father I could possibly be to Ronan. I made sure my son never felt invisible again. By the time spring arrived, the bitter memories of that toxic Christmas had begun to fade into the background, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of a happy life. Ronan's smile had fully returned, brighter and more genuine than ever. To ensure the previous trauma was completely overwritten, I hired the most sought-after, expensive portrait photographer in the entire city. We did not go to a cramped studio. We did the photo shoot at our actual home. A sprawling, beautiful modern estate nestled in the hills that I had purchased quietly a year ago but never told my family about. The photographer spent 3 hours with us, capturing Ronan playing in the massive backyard, the two of us reading together in the library, and a beautiful, formal portrait of us standing side by side in the grand entryway. When the giant canvas prints arrived, they were breathtaking. There were no dogs, no arrogant uncles, and absolutely no Photoshop required. Just a father and a son, standing together, strong and entirely visible. Ronan proudly helped me hang the largest portrait right over the fireplace in our main living room. He looked up at it, his chest puffed out with pride, and said, "We look like superheroes, Daddy." And in that moment, I knew I had won the only battle that actually mattered. Since that Christmas, my cell phone has frequently lit up with blocked messages and voicemails routed to a spam folder. I occasionally check them, purely out of morbid curiosity. They are mostly from Beatrice. Her tone has drastically changed from shrill arrogance to desperate pleading. She leaves long, tearful messages apologizing for misunderstandings, begging me to help them with rent, pleading with me to let Callahan borrow a car so he can get to a low-paying retail job he managed to secure. I listen to them and then I hit delete. I have not responded to a single one. However, yesterday the situation grew slightly more complicated. Aunt Niev, the only relative I still maintain a loving relationship with, sent me a long text message. She informed me that Beatrice's health has been declining rapidly due to the stress of her new living situation. Niev said that Beatrice cries every single day, staring at old photos, and that her only wish is to see Ronan just one more time to officially apologize to him in person before she passes away. Niev did not pressure me, but she gently suggested that holding onto this level of absolute zero contact might eventually weigh heavy on my own conscience. She said that sometimes offering forgiveness is not about letting the toxic people off the hook, but about setting yourself free from the anger. Many people online, on various forums where I have shared pieces of this story anonymously, have told me that I have already won the war. They say I achieved the ultimate revenge, utterly destroying their lives and taking my power back, and that now, as the undisputed victor, I should show a tiny sliver of grace. They argue that letting a dying grandmother see her grandson one last time would prove that I am a better, more compassionate person than they ever were. But when I look at Ronan, happily drawing at the kitchen table, completely free from the anxiety and the feeling of being less than that plagued my entire childhood, I feel a fierce, protective wall rise up around my heart. I do not want those people anywhere near his pure energy. I do not believe their tears are genuine. I believe they are just sad that they lost their wealth and their punching bag. I do not think I am wrong for protecting my son's peace, even if it means denying a sick woman her final wish. But I want to turn this over to you, the listeners, because you have been on this journey with me from the very beginning. Am I being entirely too heartless now that the dust has settled? Should I give my mother and brother one final, strictly supervised chance to see Ronan and offer an apology? Or am I completely justified in keeping the door permanently locked and letting them rot in the bed they made? Be brutally honest with me. Let me know what you would do if you were in my shoes down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for listening to this crazy, emotional story all the way to the end. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace, you are incredibly strong, and you are never alone in that struggle. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next slice of Reddit drama. See you in the next one.